good morning, good afternoon, wherever and however you're watching tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce Erin Besler. It's always great. It's always a joyful occasion when we get an alum to come and lecture. I can't believe Erin, it has been 10 years since you graduate. It literally felt like it was a couple of months ago that your thesis was up here. So it's always great, and I think it's part of a much larger logic that we're trying to do this year in our 50th anniversary. It's our 50 plus 50, so it's about to celebrate the previous 50 of the school and the future of the 50. So Erin, as an alum, represents part of that conversation. We have other things coming with faculties and dialogues and many things. So it's an interesting moment to take account. And it's always, as I said, it's great to have an alum to come back and talk to it. And I can imagine that it's a challenge for everybody. We all feel like that. It's like going back to a family reunion or something like that. So, but as I said, Erin has been developing a remarkable career. She's currently an assistant professor at Princeton University in the School of Architecture. Also, she has her firm, Besler Sons. And her work, for all of us who are familiar with her work, for those of you who are not, it tried to tackle multiple levels, multiple degrees. It have to do, of course, with design, but it have to do with intersection of technology, the intersection of media, the intersection of materiality, and everything else that keep expanding what we think or what architecture could be. So it's not only what it is, but it's also to keep expanding the horizons and what are the possibilities. So in that sense, I think Erin represents a lot of the ambitions of what SCI-Arc always tried to produce and the limits that we try to challenge, and how this is a constant evolution. It's almost like an organism that keep changing and keep evolving. And I think Erin Besler represents that at the highest level. So, as I said, it's always an opportunity for us also not only to see her work and to discuss her work and to think with her, but also it's a way for us to put a mirror ourselves and to figure it out what is that the people that come through this place, who is part of this community, when they go out, what they do with it. And I think is a very special and unique quality that tonight will have. So please join me in welcome Erin Besler back to SCI-Arc. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Hernán, for the introduction and for having me back. It feels so great to be back, and also, yes, super nervous. But I wanted to wish SCI-Arc a happy birthday first. And also, I think it's, really just so great to be here with people that I'm friends with, people that I've learned from, people that I collaborate with. Like Hernán said, it's been 10 years since I graduated, and it's pretty clear that this place has had a profound impact on me and my work and how I look at and see things. I have a practice with my husband partner, Erin Besler. Our practice is called Besler Sons. And right now, it was formed in downtown Los Angeles in 2014 or 15. We don't have any sons right now, but it was sort of a practice, a name for a practice that emerged out of a kind of inside joke with somebody that ran Ian's program in media design at Art Center. Ian was still in school when after I had graduated from SCI-Arc, and I would go and sit in the studio with Ian when I didn't really have anything to do, and the director of his program, Kevin Wingate, used to come out and say, "Oh, hey, Besler Sons are here," and we needed at some point to make an LLC, and they ask for the name of your LLC to check that nobody else has that name, and so we just like used Besler and Sons. But it also kind of like represents what seems like a family practice, which is something that's really important to us. Our parents are very much involved in our work and also produce our work. Ian's father is a electrician and has helped out in many ways, and my mother has been shuttling materials back and forth to a lot of projects at a number of occasions. So that aspect of how we work and how we kind of value the way that our practice is formed is quite important. We spend a lot of time walking around and looking at the built environment that surrounds us and recognizing the kind of like endearing and enigmatic ways that it takes shape. And perhaps as a form of research or really just as a way to move through the world, we've been documenting these moments, amassing a collection of images, pairing them with captions of charming, compelling, or otherwise idiosyncratic interventions and manifestations of the messy, curious, and quirky relationships between people and buildings. This approach characterizes much of our work, and in doing so rejects the isolationist approach that has so often been associated with architectural practice. It's striking to us how much architectural discourse can feel so detached, inscrutable, unfriendly, and exclusionary. Architecture, like so many other fields, has its own particular, relatively narrow discipline and biased catalog of reference images. And much of our work is characterized by a particular interest in the forms of knowledge and access to resources thought to separate the expert from the non-expert, and tries to question the value systems on which these terms are predicated in order to insert kind of broader, more all-encompassing set of interests and reference into contemporary architecture. So we see these images that I'll show here today as a way to begin to reconsider issues of expertise, professionalism, power, ubiquity, defaults, communication environments, construction practices, and how these things confront architecture. We imagine each as a probe projected outward to measure the extents of inclusion and offer a new point of entry into the field by looking at buildings and practices that might not necessarily be considered architecture, validating and acknowledging a broader engagement with forms of knowledge that haven't been given meaningful attention or are only just emerging. Some take liberties with size and scale as an effective means to control attention, or look at highly functional spaces and objects that come to terms with prosaic and unexceptional gestures on the one hand, and the painstaking integration of certain finished details on the other. And how the point of coinciding, where objects in question can't occupy the same space, and resolution becomes a visual expression of their inability to come together as they gather, collect, occur, or pile up one on top of the other. A lot of these images were, this one not, but a lot of them were taken in Los Angeles between 2015 and 2019 while we were living here. This one's in Italy. The images also focus on the promise of flex spaces and meaningful adaptable architecture as another episode in an ongoing set of betrayals inflicted in our consensus imagined future by developers, industrialists, and the era of late capitalism. And how component parts, especially low-cost ones like PVC and aluminum downspout pieces, foster a cheery capacity for flourishes in stark contrast to the humorless sobriety of the gutter itself. There are technological adaptations that require pretty basic workarounds and recognition of the adaptability of the parking lot. Ad hoc interventions that present practical solutions to problems not as far away from the field of architecture as they may seem. Some of the images are concerned with stubborn impropriety of life safety equipment and communication devices, or buildings that embody the formal qualities of a free, purportedly easy-to-use digital modeling software. There's objects which seem rudely unaware of their presence in disrupting a scene. Building elements that attempt to portray a stark and serious tone, but instead end up offering opportunities for humor, irony, and pun. Buildings that call attention to themselves, and those that call attention to the formal expression of security, the use of architecture to regulate space, not only functionally, but formally, as an ever-escalating confrontation of resources that will demand increasingly radical tactics as economic disparity and housing instability continue to increase. So while many of the images were originally circulated on social media, we thought it important to look to another space of distribution, and so we recently wrote a book called Best Practices, A Companion to Architecture, and its messy relationship with building materials, signage systems, communication equipment, plant life, and people. The publication was supported by a grant from the Graham Foundation and was edited by Courtney Kaufman and Christina Muschel and includes a foreword by Sylvia Levin and contributing text from Jonathan Christman, Wendy Gilmartin, and Fiona Connor. The book proposes a way of thinking about neighborhoods, housing developments, streetscapes, storefronts, and interiors as places defined as much by building codes, dimensions, and geographic features as assemblages of impromptu interventions and incidental ephemera. The book includes a selection of 75 images and pairs the photographic documentation with extensive captions and citations to define a territory within the margins between the sanctioned and unsanctioned, the regulated and unregulated, the tasteful and tacky, and the novel and the nonsense. So the book advocates for a more thorough consideration of unauthorized remodels, slapdash handiwork, haphazard paint jobs, half-hearted DIY projects, cracked facades, contradictions, compromises, and coincidences. It's organized into 9 loose categories, although there tends to be a bit of overlap. So austerities is a chapter about economic demands, capital flows, and how class structures manifest in the material finishes of the built environment. Coincidences is about the charming juxtapositions that are created when different messages and material treatments start to harmonize and rhyme. Compromises is about the unfortunate outcomes of settling. Conflicts about the unfortunate outcomes of not settling. Coverings is about the hurried impulse to obscure, redact, and remove elements of the city. And edges is a chapter about the frictions and tangible discomfort apparent in the ambiguity between one object and another. Edits is about how surprisingly fussy a quick fix can be. Fittings about the endearing strategies of connection, and ostentations about the self-conscious showiness that gives life and personality to the otherwise prosaic or banal objects and spaces that we encounter every day. And for us, the term best practices is, of course, business or corporate jargon that many people may be familiar with, and is a topic that our own office is particularly interested in, exploring how research, experience, knowledge, and expertise are synthesized in design practice, and the systems that kind of exist to regulate this information. The writing in the book is relatively short form and slightly meandering, and a kind of see and say approach, which we hope opens up space to propose new ways of understanding the design of everyday spaces and ubiquitous objects. It provides an opportunity to address more nuanced and indefinite relationships between forms of power and how they manifest, and it attempts to address the implications and possibilities of design in the era of late capitalism, the often and inscrutable and obfuscated workings of class, labor, markets, inequities, sovereignty, and globalization. And the book draws on a sort of relatively recent history of architects going around and looking at things, and Sylvia writes about this in her intro, and mostly we were looking at Bernard Rudofsky's Architecture Without Architects and Venturi's Scott Brown, or Venturi's Complexity and Contradiction, and also, of course, learning from Las Vegas, Ed Ruscha's Palm Trees, and other books, and how sort of a photo essay or a photo book can begin to make an argument or a case for, or kind of set the tone for a design practice in a way. So this concern with systems of circulation and distribution and the regulation and access to information, resources, and know-how has informed many of our projects, from large-scale home improvement centers to local hardware stores that cater to and support the maintenance of local communities. The ubiquity and availability of many consumer-oriented building materials and supplies often stands in stark contrast to some of the dominant narratives that seek to distinguish architecture from building. And so this is a project that looks to everyday aspects of construction and things that have been relegated to practice, like building information modeling, to situate them in a conceptual design framework. The project was first exhibited at the MAC in Los Angeles and was first part of my fellowship project at UCLA when I first started teaching there, right after I graduated from SCI-Arc. And then expanded for the Chicago Architecture Biennial in an exhibition and conference in Sydney. And so each version of the project deals with the kinds of problems that arise as projects move across platforms, from like 3D modeling software to BIM, and through large systems of material distribution to a piece of construction, or in this case, a series of freestanding rooms. So the project was really looking more specifically at the information that's gained and lost when you move from a line or curve, like defined by points in CAD software to a BIM environment, what kinds of biases, tendencies, and subjectivities are built into each of these software platforms, and how architecture is kind of embedded into other systems of power and organization, in this case, a system of material organization and management of not just products and objects, but also people and what they know how to do. And so moving between these two platforms or between two different ways of ascribing value to things causes aberrations. In this project, this was all registered through the kind of strange appearance and disappearance of details in corners and at seams. And really just register the fact that the inside of a wall and the outside of a wall are not the same thing, or fronts and backs are not the same. So not only are they finished differently, but they register different forms of know-how and also work. So in these rooms, the stud spacing's not typical. In some cases, there's like way too many. But the way we were thinking about the studs, and actually, it's pretty funny, the studs, at least in BIM software, they're not really part of the software's default kind of modeling library. You need like a plugin, or at least it's not something you can readily access using the version of the software that's supposed to cater to architects, perhaps because they thought that it's already been determined, or that architects aren't supposed to deal with the things on the back sides of the wall, or that maybe we don't care about backs and we only care about fronts. Or in some sense, this kind of project is trying to call attention to that and to work in that space. So we were super concerned with the studs, and not just as a necessary part of a constructed wall system where rule of thumb or manufacturer cut sheets dictate spacing and alignment, but as something that could begin to do more work to measure and mark the form. And there's a sort of like more recent history again of projects that in Los Angeles in particular that deal with studs as the site of a project, like Frank Gehry's houses, and also Michael Asher's work at the Santa Monica Museum that the project was sort of in conversation with. And so one of the more interesting things that came out of this project, or this sort of particular version of it, was an idea of a template. And at the Mac, we couldn't fix anything to the floor. This is in the Mackey garage top. So we had to figure out some other way to secure the walls, and we designed these like thin plywood bases to essentially protect the floor. But at a certain point, we realized these could kind of do more work, could begin to be instructional or communicative in some way. And so, the contractor used curved tracks to trace for the curved walls. And in many ways, this kind of eliminated the need for the typical set of construction drawings and produced another form of like on-site communication. So alongside the built rooms, we developed a software called StudFindr with Satoru Sugihara as a way to try to open up the project outside of some of the more esoteric architectural questions. It's a really sort of limited BIM-like software program where you can squiggle on a screen and it turns your squiggle into one of these stud wall rooms. But that's kind of the only thing it does. So this shifted the attention in our design focus from like a kind of single special object to a system where we gave up a little bit of the project, gave up control to allow a larger public. This was for the Chicago Architecture Biennial, to design a room of their own. And I mean, just thinking about the Biennial as a site is in a public building in downtown Chicago, and it's a site that many people, architects go to, an event that architects go to, but also an event that a lot of people just, because of the nature of its location and the openness of the Chicago Cultural Center, people that aren't architects stumble into. And it was like important to us to try to like find a space for them where they felt like people that weren't architects felt like they got it, or they could participate or contribute in some way. So this project, like a lot of what we're interested in, questions the sort of rigidity or territory around architectural design. Where does it begin and end? What are the limits of architectural expertise, and who gets to decide what we can work on, or who gets to decide who makes what and what's sort of considered architecture and what's not. So if today tools are kind of like ubiquitous and all around us, the question seems to like really no longer be, at least for me, how interesting or resolved of a thing you can make, but where does design end and what's the separation? Or really, why is there so much of a separation between producers and consumers in the discourse of design interactions and experiences? So this is like a small portion or a sample of what we were calling a drawing set that you can download after you design your room. It's obviously different for each room. Actually, like on the left is how the project was exhibited at the gallery in Sydney that Matt Au did the exhibition design for. And on small tablets that were hooked up to a printer, you could squiggle on the screen and then like print a plan of your own. And it's not like, a drawing set in the typical sense or conventional sense, but we were interested in a form of communication that could be used by the person that would be squiggling on the screen, that would be visiting, the biennial, that might not know like how to read an architectural plan. So that's what you see on the right. It's like a bunch of 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, a few hundred like this for each room that when ordered, and laid out on the floor. They make a paper template. So we were thinking about it as a set for the public without specialized expertise or access to like advanced software or fabrication tools. Something that's more intuitive and formatted for someone with access to just like the web and a desktop printer or things that like a local library might have. At least that's like the aspiration. So also when you download and print your room, you get some GIFs, like construction GIFs, demonstration animations. Here's like a few for the bottom track, stud framing and hanging drywall. And, stop motion animated GIFs for us seem kind of like a really underutilized format, especially for depicting repetitive or general instructions in a like endearing and playful way, which we think makes things just more, not just joyful, but like accessible in a way, mostly because we recognize that quite a lot of people are looking at our work, like at your work, like all of our work in this room and on social media, in addition to the more formal spaces of exhibition and display. So how do we like not alienate people and make them feel like part of a project? And I mean, like coming out of this project, it's like really hard not to be concerned, particularly with drywall and like how much drywall we used and just like increasingly aware of the material and environmental consequences of our projects, particularly those that have relatively short lifespans. Most of our work up till now has like been circulated through exhibitions and installations that have lifespans of like 1 week to 3 months. And so just the amount of like material waste that's produced is weighs pretty heavily on us. And where the movement of material through projects isn't necessarily considered. And I mean, we really like think that waste, I guess we've been thinking that waste is really just a kind of categorization of material, like conceptual barrier to keeping it in circulation and not having it end up in a landfill. So when we were asked to put together a proposal for MOMA PS1, Young Architects Program, which sadly I don't think is happening right now anymore, we thought pretty critically about the fact that many of the things that produce construction and demolition waste revolve around the fact that waste is considered to be a problem really relegated to building and industry rather than architecture, like not conceptualized necessarily as part of a project. That's changing, I think, but at the time, this was like 2015, it seemed to not be part of a conversation. So this project began with the premise that everything in architecture is a variation of something that's come before. In a sense, forms being reused, ideas being reiterated, and diagrams repurposed and not wasted. And so why do we have this issue with material waste if so many of the other things that we do in architecture are about reuse? Or what can we do to deal with waste and reuse as an architectural problem, as something that would be built into the project from the beginning? Of course, there's like a lot of liability that goes along with reusing materials and like structures that exist outside of architecture, but as a premise, it seemed like a kind of important question to be asking. So we propose an agenda of zero waste that would be conceptualized through a project about making something fit, making it fit for use. And like we look at the internet a lot, and like Maru is kind of all over the internet. And Maru is a cat that likes to fit in things. And so for us, like fitting in is as much a sort of social and cultural problem as it is a formal one. But I guess more architecturally, this problem like has been cited in the roof, in that the roof never really fits exactly over a building, in order to allow other things to fit together. And some types of roofs actually like developed out of the need to fit one thing onto another or under another in order to avoid like taxation and things like this. So the roof became a pretty like interesting site of a project for us in relation to these issues. So the project took the roof of the existing MOMA PS1 building, like copied it conceptually, and then reused it and refitted into the courtyard. So it's produced a kind of totalizing scheme, and the pieces that get bent and broken because it didn't really fit exactly are refit into the project as a sort of like dance deck. I mean, the PS1 program was so built around this like summer concert series called Warm Up and making a party. And actually, like when we sent these images to them ahead of time, because they asked for like press images, they were like, oh, it doesn't look fun. Like, can you make it more fun? So we like, I mean, I don't know if I have these photos in here actually, but we like put glitter on our models, and like we like glued glitter to them and did all these crazy things with lights to like try to make it look more fun, but somehow, yeah, like wasn't really, I mean, it was supposed to be fun, but like the architecture was supposed to be about something else. So, yeah, so anyway, this sort of like exposing the sort of material system that makes the thing stand up was an like important part of the project, and like sort of underlayer of things that were maybe not typically meant to see, but that ultimately became a way to begin to think through material circulation and reuse. So with a kind of like interest in this, we sought to exploit the tendency to accumulate waste that building practices typically produce. And rather than sort of discard material remnants off-site, excess was cut into the project and like fit for use. So the idea was basically that like a group of people would come together in a kind of like community event during construction to like raise the roof, like literally raise the roof. And so all of this information about assembly and on-site handling, material waste, procedures needed to be communicated in the field. So one way we did this was proposed to do this was through instructional videos, like sort of these GIFs that demonstrated general assembly of elements on site. And we, like many other people, proposed making an app. But because not all of the instances are the same, actually none of them are the same, we sort of needed to like develop a way to track all of these like offcuts and things. So here you can like add your offcuts to the app and like know sort of what's in the pile of stuff that you're cutting and needing to be reused. So things aren't categorized as waste. So as a sort of like easy to use system that managed the misfit between standard construction and like irregular conditions on the site to account for, catalog, and track in detail the reuse of material and eliminate waste. So alongside the app, we also like proposed this website that opened up the space of the project during the exhibition and tried to make it more social in terms of like media and access through the scheduling of summer fitness classes, like another kind of fitness of bodies under the roof, like under the deck, from like CrossFit to yoga, spinning, and other forms of like bodily movement and expression. And this idea was that this would all be propelled through celebrity fitness trainers that would take a week in the summer concert series. So we selected 11 trainers to come during warm up, and they like totally didn't like it. They just didn't like, I think, like an architect proposing programming when they already had their own programming or something. So it seems important to think through how to use like consumer-oriented and more advanced software and hardware systems to propel a project that isn't just engaged in a form and technology, which is super important to us, but that's also kind of like conceptually aware. And one way we've begun to do that is through a particular interest in construction technologies, software, platform, social media, and other kinds of things that rely less on expertise and more on ubiquity. And the effects that architecture has had on the environment still are kind of staggering enough to force us to constantly question our place in the field. I think everybody's sort of feeling the weight of all of this. But our hope is that by questioning some of these things that got us here and our sort of climate crisis and architecture's role in all of that, that we can do better. And more recently, we've been working with, I've been working with a group at Princeton and an organization called RARE Philly, which is an artist residency located on a construction and demolition waste center in Northeast Philadelphia. And we've been working on some of these issues specifically related to timber framing and the cycles of wood as a building material, and sort of been particularly focused on how so many of the processes we impose on trees to turn them into building materials results in a kind of denaturing or abstraction. Like this is a software for processing a tree, it turns it into rectangles, which is, it's just bananas to me when you start to think about that. And that sort of abstraction makes it easier to sort of forget that these things they were living and they came from the earth, and that, they're not all the same. And, it sort of makes it easier to just throw them away. And so what we're kind of, trying to do is account for all of this stuff. So many buildings in the United States are built largely from wood, along with other things that make that basic wood system stable, insulated, habitable, particularly in residential construction. At the same time, those things that make buildings work also make them more opaque to the average person. It makes it harder for people to understand what's in their home, what it's made of, and have access to it, and kind of what to do to maintain it. So we've been working kind of hard on ways to catalog houses houses, a kind of category of house that represents some of the largest building stock in the United States, and shift the conception from something fixed and stagnant or valued largely by the number of bedrooms and bathrooms, which is something that the real estate industry kind of drives, to something that is valued more for its material composition, something like a material bank, or a material supply center, that the house becomes a material supply center. The material in the house can be reused for the future. These ideas are not new and have largely been informed by our conversations with ARUP and their work into circular design. Parallel to looking at existing building stock, we're also interested in implications for design, how do we begin to design for deconstruction? So designing things that aren't buried behind layers of drywall, which is just really actually sort of difficult to reuse, and what it might mean to think of things buried inside the walls as not being there forever. Pipes burst, things happen. So access to the stuff in the wall becomes quite important, not just for repairs, but for this idea of circulation and recirculation. So these are just some images from a kind of house we designed, where we tried to conceptualize the wall as a site of temporary accommodation for this stuff that holds the house up and makes the house work, but also people can open a closet. Alongside this, we've developed an app called Housemate that's another version of a smart home. It's a sort of dashboard for your house, and it's a digital storage bank that records the materials in your home and tries to maintain them at their highest potential use value, and tracks their status through something called a material passport, which logs the use, history, and disposition of building components as it's a Carfax for all the stuff in your house, or the validation of it is kind of similar to blockchain, and provides tips for the inspection of damage to wood, as many of the tests actually for wood, to ascertain whether or not it has damage or has suffered rot or anything like this, are really just a visual inspection. So it's something that can be automated. It's something that, not just automated, but it's something that the average person could do with a little bit of assistance. And also provides an interface to help with assembly, maintenance, and the removal of damaged parts. So we've also been working on like the design of some buildings and trying to, I guess, have like an architecture practice and trying to think through what it might mean to push some of these more like conceptual ideas and critical position through building practice, through a design practice. And so we've kind of been working on a series of sheds. That's kind of like scale of project that's afforded to us right now. And also, I mean, it's great. Like we're so into the shed and it's like place in like architectural history. But it's also something that like a lot of people have in their backyards and something that like doesn't seem necessarily designed or that you can also like just go to Home Depot and buy. So we've been thinking through the design of a shed as something that could kind of like do more and like dealing with like these ideas of material circulation and reuse and sheds as like things that are that seem perhaps more temporary than a house. I mean, even just like the etymology of the word shed suggests that it's like not like just not like the house and not like the permanent building and is trying to be more casual in some sense. So this is like a wood shed that we've designed for a house in Illinois that tries to recuperate and reuse some building materials like wood specifically in a way that would be available for sort of like deconstruction or reconfiguration if the need arises. And then, I mean, we've also just been thinking about, this is a project I worked on with some students at Princeton. We've been thinking about like, not just like trees come from earth, like all building materials come from the earth. And it's like, God, it's like when you start to think about like the big hole in the ground that would be there if you thought of all of like the building material is like coming out of one. It's just like so incredible to think about how much material we've taken out of the earth to build buildings. But we've been interested in like rammed earth as a specific kind of construction logic, material logic, system that has at times like in its development and history kind of catered toward the amateur practitioner, but that also represent like directly tied to a kind of material that seems to be quite uniform, but is even just like across the United States. Like this is a wonderful map that one of my students, Reese Greenlee, found that like really gets at the variation of soils and also like the effort to try to categorize them and classify them through their kind of like pigment in a way. And so we sort of developed a series of rammed earth sheds and produced kind of GIF animations, instruction sequences. I mean, the technology is quite simple and kind of amazing in its durability and ease of production in a way. And the components are there on every site. The main building component is there on every site. It's the earth. Some earth lends itself better than others to this type of construction. Some environments obviously lend themselves better than others. But we looked mostly at what the sort of like, not only like consequences of this might be, but also like design, sort of what a design agenda for rammed earth might be for us. And it really seemed like the separation of the wall and the roof was something to take quite seriously, or just how to support a roof on walls that needed to be, that didn't really necessarily have any internal stabilization. So these use a kind of like earth buttress in a way. That's what the like corrugation is. It's trying to like thicken the wall in select places, and then sort of truss system just sits on top. This one works more like a big bond beam. And this is just like a very large canopy roof. But the roof became a kind of a secondary design element, I guess, for us. So we also like make our own objects, and we have been, and this is a project that also like started in Los Angeles, downtown Los Angeles, and that was really prompted by like just walking around downtown and looking at the ground. And there's such like amazing like terrazzo work at the entrances to a lot of buildings in downtown, particularly like the financial district and things like this. And so they're called props. They're like a series of like passive objects design terrazzo objects. It's like the first project in our office where we didn't lose money, which felt like so good. And I mean, it sounds like ridiculous and silly, but like when you, I mean, everybody sort of knows in here, like when you start a practice, it's so hard to like not lose money. But hopefully that's changing for your generation. I mean, I hope people don't like, anyway, I hope that's changing. So there's a series of like designed objects that, along with terrazzo, we were sort of interested in the like anonymity and ubiquity of doorstops. And each prop is like passive and designed to be used in multiple ways as bookends, doors like doorstops, paperweights, wheel stops, things like this. And we like have been producing them ourselves with tools and materials in our office. This was like our office in Los Angeles. And that's Ian. And he really does like most of the work, and I just pick up colors. I mean, I started doing it and then he got more into it. My production process was so slow, and then he got faster. And then we moved to like all those things on the front, those little color blocks are diamond pad, like sanding pads. And we were doing everything by hand, like grinding the concrete by hand for a long time. And then we got like a power grinder and then started producing like ramped up production. And our props have been like at museum stores, here mostly like Museum of Contemporary Art bookstore, the Hammer Museum, and like the Marciano Art Foundation. And they feature sort of custom blend of post-consumer recycled colored glass and marble chips, which are added to a cement mixture and cast in a series of distinct molds. So there's 6 molds. These are 5 of them. These are the ones that kind of like are at a size that can like sit on your table. Our props were in a little like New York Times Tea magazine ad, and those little things, reminds my mouse there. Yeah, that's our little props. And I mean, when this was like on in the Tea magazine, we were getting messages from people like, oh my God, that's like, they thought it was like the big stuff. And no, but I mean, terrazzo doesn't really lend itself that well to being like a mass, like a massive object. It really likes to be like thin, like a floor. And so, I mean, these things they're non-scalable. Like they don't really change size very easily, but we decided at some point to like try to make a parking chock. And we only made one because it weighed like 500 pounds. So this is the parking chock, and I think it's still in LA in like Danielle Rago's front yard, and hasn't moved for years. So like we are also interested in the fact that like people often tell us that these things remind them of like nougat or other candies, and there's a sort of nice connection there between confection and confetti. And while the installation of terrazzo in commercial applications generally requires like highly skilled, really very reliable tradespeople, accurate color matching and precise applications and extensive specifications, because of its means of production, the most visible quality of terrazzo is the sort of composition of the aggregate. It's actually quite casual and imprecise. So we've been working on ways that we can bring some like precision or specificity to the qualities of the surface material, and have been developing a kind of interactive software where users can specify and order their own designs by selecting materials and colors for the aggregate composition. This was like we hoped that this would like allow people to like come and order like tons of props from us, but nobody ever really did. So it just exists as a kind of like it's stagnated. But what is also like kind of interesting to us and like super important about the narrative of that project to us is that we learned how to make them just by watching YouTube videos, which I'm sure like everybody in this audience has done, like learned how to do something by watching a YouTube video. And so like while we've learned a lot from instructional videos, we've been interested in them more critically as well, and how they might provide a kind of opportunity to rethink the limits of the differentiation between like expert and amateur, or between producers and consumers, and sort of like inadequacy of these distinctions for certain models of production. So this is a project, this is the last project I'll show, that was exhibited at the 2017 Chicago Architecture Biennial, where we were asked by the curators as were a lot of other people, to make a model of a canonical interior. No, to choose a photo of a canonical interior and make a model of it. So Enjoy Your Deck is an architectural model of an online how-to home improvement video of a backyard deck constructed from paper and digital screens. And the project tried to reframe online video sharing platforms such as YouTube as a category of media that circulates imagery, while also generating its own set of language, media, data, and associations. So like through comment sections, view count statistics, recommendations for related viewing, pop-up advertisements, closed captions, and various options for sharing with friends and across social media. And maybe because they're like more relatable and somehow more linear than like a printed user manual or something like this, it seems like the videos have become a way for individuals to find a meaningful forum to insert themselves as both producers and consumers into the discourse of designed objects and experiences. And these like short narrative clips, some of them, I mean, this one's like sped up clearly, provide us with an important component of how construction and building practices manifest in media imagery, and how issues of labor, competency, and discourse are staged around these sites of production. Through like sheer volume and ease of circulation, this category of media, well, we argued that this is canonical because of the sheer volume and ease of circulation, that it elevates it into the canon by prescribing the sort of like official way of doing things and offering a space like in the comment section for the ongoing litigation of terms, methods, and best practices. So of the like 200 million tutorial videos on YouTube, a huge number are for relatively small backyard decks. So we made a scale paper model of a backyard deck and made a YouTube video documenting the construction of it, which requires just a little more than concrete, dimensional lumber, hardware, basic power tools, and weekend. And given that almost like all amateur instructional videos are recorded in and around the context of the home, whether it be in the kitchen or the den or the bedroom or the bathroom, they're inscribed with a sort of uniquely domestic focus. So these like broad spectrum of instructional videos that range from this concise, deliberate, and coherent to the like esoteric and bizarre point to the potential that online media platforms possess for flattening previously recognized distinctions between amateur and professional, creative, productive, and pedagogical practices. So much of the content that viewers and software users encounter online today is dictated by the vagaries of search algorithms, keyword combinations, and determinations of PageRank, which often privilege categories such as like collectively derived relevance and recently uploaded over historically favored credentials such as certification, seniority, and affiliations with governing bodies and professional institutions. And they kind of begin to expand these discussions by reframing expertise as quantifiable, digestible, and communicable, and just like basically a set of discrete procedures. So alongside the YouTube video and the physical model of the biennial, we made a website with a catalog of backyard scenes, individual tools and construction materials, and like recreation items, which were also in the model, where visitors of all ages can access and make paper models of their own by downloading PDFs of unfolded texture maps and folding them back up. So like everything from like the CMU blocks to trash cans, tape measures, and yeah, we're in the process of making a book. It's like been in the works for, well, since 2017, so 4.5 years, which will includes these like kind of paper doll assembly kits of backyard objects, and along with interviews and conversations with people that use these tools and work in their backyards. So I hope it's out soon and that you all get it. Thank you so much.